Everyone, welcome back to the Miraculous Mamas podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth Joy, and we believe in empowering women through storytelling and education. And I'm so glad that you're here. If you missed last week's episode, make sure you go back and listen. Vito and I tell the birth story of Tula, and it was really cathartic listening back to it. I definitely forgot a few points that now I can't even remember, but if I listen to it, I'll be like, oh yeah, this, and this. I just remember when I was pushing Tula out, I was like, I'm pooping, I'm going to poop. So that's fun. And they're like, no. But yeah, it was a good time. It was, like I said, really cathartic going back and listening to it. So go back and do that. If you're listening, also make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast. Leave a review. That's the best way to get more exposure, more listeners, and be able to get more great content on here. We're going to dive right into the episode today. I have on Prijanka Jain, and we're going to talk all about vaginal microbiome. Did you know that your vagina has microbiome? And it's really cool, the company that she's created and what they're doing. And I'm going to let her tell you all about it. All right, everyone. I am so excited about today's episode. You know that I love everything about female anatomy, being a doula. I love learning just as much as I can. And today we have on Prijanka Jain, and she is the CEO and co-founder of Evie. And they came up with this amazing test to test your vaginal microbiome. And it's something I'm so interested in learning about, especially since having Jovi and having more kids, because I know that your kid's first line of defense when they're being born vaginally is coming through the vaginal canal, getting coated in the microbiome. And I've had some issues since having a kid. I've had yeast infections. My pH has been off. There's so many things that throw us for a loop, and I'm just so excited to dive into this with her. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Oh my God, thank you so much for having me. It's amazing to talk to someone who's so passionate about the topic and knows so much. You have the lived experience, and you're definitely not alone. I think a lot of women, as you go through different journeys, whether they're pregnancy related or not, end up experiencing issues with their vaginal microbiome and feeling confused the same way that you do.
Mm-hmm. I feel like I have 20 questions to start out with, but I just want to start with maybe you telling us a little bit about yourself and then how you came up with this test, and even there's probably so many people listening being like, microbiome in your vagina. I thought that was just in your gut or intestines or something. Totally. So if you can just kind of elaborate on all of that.
Of course. So a little bit on myself. I come from a background in the kind of data science AI world, but always approaching kind of the question of how can we use data to actually improve access to opportunity or make people's lives better. And most interestingly for me has always been, how can we actually use data to make life better for women and people who've kind of been overlooked in existing systems. And I spent the past 4 or 5 years as the head of product at a very cool company, also here in New York, where our mission was to essentially make the hiring process more fair for women and people who don't come from traditional backgrounds. And we did a lot of really interesting work on building what we called ethical algorithms that you can actually pre-test for fairness and that you could make sure we're transparent. And it's so interesting being in healthcare where you have so many of those similar challenges, right? So many of the data sets that we use to train algorithms in healthcare are based on primarily male data sets, right? And as we think about making data more usable within healthcare, it's so important to think about making the decisions transparent and explainable to the average person, right? Why are you at risk for something? Or why is this the best care pathway to you is such an important component of all of this. So I came at, this question of why is the female body such a medical mystery? That was essentially my original question. And it was triggered by, similar to you were talking about your experiences. I think, in addition to the fact that everyone was thinking more about healthcare than usual over the past 2 years, I think, I was dealing with a myriad of my own, just mysterious healthcare problems, right? Just going to the doctor, feeling like something's wrong. I'm always feeling sick, or this is happening to me. And doctor after doctor telling me maybe you should drink more water, or like, maybe you're tired, or like, maybe you should sleep more, or you're stressed. And I was just like, is anyone ever going to use data to help me better understand my body or to make decisions about my body? Coming from the data world, it just felt so obvious to me that we weren't using data in so many of these decisions. And as I started to do some of my own research, that was when I realized that women weren't required to be in clinical research in the US until 1993, which is like, it was just my aha moment of like, oh, everything in my life makes sense now. Like, of course we don't know what's wrong with me. We haven't even studied the female body for 30 years, right? And it's not like we changed that law in 1993 and then everything was fine. To this day, women are on average diagnosed 4 years later than men across 770 diseases, right? And what that says to me is there's so much we don't understand about health and disease in the female body, right? And when we go get our physical every year, all of those things that we check on, right? When you get your blood drawn, it's not like it's sitting on the counter saying, ask me about my vitamin D or ask me about my cholesterol, right? We decided that those are important metrics to track. And we're so curious at Evie about what are the metrics that exist in the female body uniquely that we don't actually track or measure that could help us so much better understand what health and disease look like uniquely in the female body. And our first focus, as you mentioned, is on the vaginal microbiome, which it turns out is not only the cause of the most common conditions in women, right? Bacterial vaginosis, recurrent yeast infections, recurrent UTIs, aerobic vaginitis, cytolytic vaginosis. There's a whole long tail of kind of primary conditions of the vaginal microbiome that drive women to the doctor in spades, that affect our physical health, our mental health, our relational health, our health, all of the above. But there's so much research that shows that that composition of the vaginal microbiome is also then associated with so many broader health outcomes, everything from fertility challenges to pregnancy challenges to STI acquisition to cervical cancer progression. And I was just shocked that we, as people with vaginas, have no access to this information on our own body, and that no one in the healthcare system is using that information to make more informed or personalized decisions about our healthcare. And that was really where we started at Evie, was with that at-home test, as you mentioned, so that women can access this data on their own bodies and make much more informed decisions about their health.
Yeah. Wow. That is so amazing. I've never had anyone ever ask about like my vaginal health with anything. And I've definitely had my own issues too. Like, people who listen to the podcast know I've dealt with like just for different period issues and a lot of different stuff. And as I mentioned, like, since having a baby now, my pH is like been way off. I got BV for the very first time after having my daughter, but I didn't really have like the signs of it. So I didn't even know. My gynecologist was like, you look a little like irritated and yeasty down here, so I'm just going to send in a swab. And it came back positive for that. And I like to try to avoid antibiotics like as much as I can, or anything invasive. So even when I found out that I had a yeast infection like in January, I was like, crap, like I'm going to be having my baby in the next couple of months. I know the importance of like, I don't know the majority of what you just said, but like, I know like the importance of like when the baby passes through the vaginal birth canal and their, first line of defense for immunity and the probiotics that they get from that. So after I had the yeast infection, I had to use Monistat for 7 days. So then I did some yogurt suppositories after, which I found out from Ryan from Needed. But I was like trying to Google, like, what should I do?
Totally.
And there was like no information. I'm like, she just said to do these yogurt suppositories. I'm just going in blindly. Like, I'm just going to try it for a couple of days and see like what happens. Because also I knew that I was going to have my Group B strep test coming up soon. And I'm like, I really don't want to be on antibiotics again if I don't have to. So I'm like, what can I do to like help my vaginal health? But yet I know nothing about it.
Isn't it? It's so crazy to me. And I think what's so frustrating is as we start to seek out information, we're bombarded by all these companies trying to sell us products being like, make your vagina smell like a flower and use this wash and this wipe. And you're like, our vaginas aren't supposed to smell like flowers, like newsflash. They're a body part, right? And I think there's so much shame and confusion. And it frustrates me so much how hard it is for women to get access to real evidence-backed scientific information about their vaginal health. And that's another part of what we're we're really focused on. But if it's helpful, I'm more than happy to give kind of a high level overview of what the vaginal microbiome is. I just realized I didn't answer that part of your question, which I know is probably a helpful one for most people.
Yeah, I would love to know too, like for myself, like I knew that there was stuff there just from like reading about like the vaginal seeding and with birth, but beyond that, I really know nothing.
I mean, that's very fair. This is not something, unfortunately, that we are taught about our bodies. But like you said, I think most people are at least aware of the microbiome that exists in their gut. And really, microbiome is a fancy word for just like a bunch of microbes, meaning bacteria and fungi that live together on some part of your body, right? And there's the one that lives in your gut. There's one that lives across all of your skin, in your mouth, and turns out also one that lives in your vagina. And if you think about, the role that the vagina plays in the female body, it's really like the structural connection between the outside world, which is full of all of these different pathogens, right, that are just like existing in the world, and then some of our most important reproductive organs, right? And it turns out that we've evolved with this community of microbes that live in our vagina that do a lot more than just kind of like hang out there. It turns out that we've evolved with them, and they actually perform what I call kind of like a local immune system effort for us. And the way in which they do that is when the vaginal microbiome is in a healthy or a balanced state, it's typically dominated by certain types of microbes, the most common of which are lactobacilli. And that's probably why Ryan was telling you to take yogurt suppositories. Yogurt has a lot of lactobacilli, although unfortunately it is typically a different strain of lactobacilli than what is found in the vagina. But you're correct that, a healthy vagina is dominated by those types of microbes. And what those microbes actually do is they produce a lot of lactic acid and hydrogen peroxide, and they make the vaginal environment really acidic, right? So, maybe this is a little too visual, but, the white discharge that you typically have is actually that lactic acid that's being produced by those microbes. It's really protecting you. And the way in which that's protecting you is if, a pathogen gets into your vagina. Like I always say, God forbid, women live their lives. You have sex with someone, you sit in your swimsuit for too long, you have a long period. All of those things can increase your pH or introduce new pathogens. And if those pathogens start to take over, what happens is you get that imbalance of the protective and the disruptive microbes. When you're in a healthy state, those protective microbes and that acidic environment make it almost impossible for those pathogens to survive, meaning they get in there and then it's too acidic and they die off, right? And that's what those protective microbes are doing for you, right? They're acting as that local immune system. But when those bad microbes start to take over, you lose that kind of protective layer that you had, and those pathogens are then able to kind of make a home in the vagina, start to go up the reproductive tract. And that's when we see that they start to cause problems like that's why it's assumed that they're associated with infertility and with preterm birth and with pelvic inflammatory disease and all of these other infections and issues, because you've lost that kind of local immune layer that a healthy vaginal microbiome provides. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a lot of information to absorb, so I'm like trying to like take it all in. Because, like you said, we've never been taught this, so
totally,
like it's basically a whole immune system in your vagina.
Totally, yeah, and you have healthy microbes that are fighting for you and fighting off the bad guys. And when those healthy microbes start to lose out, and those kind of disruptive microbes make a home, they can cause a lot of other problems for our overall health.
Mm-hmm. Is your credit card doing enough for you? Because with the secured Chime Credit Builder Visa credit card, you can start building credit with everyday purchases and on-time payments. With Credit Builder, members can increase their credit history with no annual fees or interest. And having good credit score can mean getting a better car loan rate or renting apartments easier or just bragging rights around the dinner table of who has the highest credit score. So continue your credit journey with Chime. Sign up only takes 2 minutes and doesn't affect your credit score. Get started at chime.com/mamas. That's chime.com/mamas. The Chime Credit Builder Visa credit card is issued by a Stride Bank N.A. pursuant to license a Visa USA Chime checking account and $200 qualifying direct deposit required to apply for the secured Chime Credit Builder Visa card. Regular on-time payment history can have a positive impact on your credit score. Impact to score may vary, and some user scores may not improve. So what types of things, I guess, affect the microbiome? I mean, you already said, sex, like different things like that, but can like actually like your diet or other things that you're just putting in your body, not necessarily in your vagina, affect it as well?
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, unfortunately, my answer here is a little bit that, of course, we need better research. And that's always what I'm going to say on this topic. It's so frustrating to me how there could be something that affects our quality of life so much. Like all of us who've been there know how frustrating when the vaginal microbiome is unhappy, how unhappy we are. And the fact that that is like one of the most common things that happen to women, and it has all of these expensive, big outcomes, and yet we literally know nothing, drives me insane. Another very sad fact that I will share is that I might butcher the exact numbers, but it's that I think 95% of women suffer from PMS and only 19% of men have erectile dysfunction. But we've spent 5 times as much money researching erectile dysfunction than we have PMS. So just like a lack of research is always, unfortunately, a part of the answer. Mm-hmm. But to answer your question more directly, so many things affect our vaginal microbiome, right? And it's happening all throughout our life. One of the largest disruptions to the vaginal microbiome is actually sex, which is probably unsurprising, penetrative sex. And more specifically, the penis itself actually also has a little microbiome, and it can introduce new microbes into your vagina. Additionally, semen actually has more bacteria than it has sperm. So it's also introducing bacteria into your microbiome. And third is like, down there, a lot of the holes are close together, and the bacteria that comes out of your butt can then also kind of move around and get into your vagina, which can also cause problems. So generally, sex is a very large trigger for a lot of women who suffer from infections. But a lot of other things also affect our vaginal health. Hormones are a big one. So kind of on a smaller scale throughout our menstrual cycle, as our levels of estrogen go up and down, we see changes in the vaginal microbiome. Birth control has a large effect on the vaginal microbiome. As women go through menopause and estrogen levels decrease, we see a huge effect on the vaginal microbiome. All the different types of products you use, obvious things like don't douche, don't use scented wipes, all of those things. That's because, again, they can affect the vaginal microbiome. And, it's wild to me that we actually don't have better research on diet in the vaginal microbiome. I mean, my strong hypothesis is that there is definitely a relationship. A lot of women will tell you from their lived personal experiences that their diet affects their vaginal microbiome, but unfortunately we don't actually have great answers to that from a scientific perspective yet.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, because for me, what's interesting, I guess, for me is like either if I've been like eating like crap, or if I've, so I haven't had a UTI in probably like 14, 15 years. It's been a long time, thankfully. But if I I also haven't like gone out and drank in a long time either. But if I like went out drinking, didn't drink enough water, ate a lot of sugar, usually the next day I feel like I'm starting to get a UTI, and I can usually catch it in the beginning and like just drink a bunch of like lemon water, flush out my system. But I found a huge correlation in myself when I was younger with not being hydrated, eating like crap, and being more prone to like UTIs. And now that I'm older and I know that I have some gut issues, I feel like that's linked to the yeast too, because I know that I deal with some candida stuff. So I feel like if you have a candida overgrowth, that's yeast. Why would that not be linked to like a yeast infection?
Totally. I mean, obviously our body operates as one system, right? And so to assume that, they're not related makes less sense to me. But again, it's another on my list of things that it's wild we haven't studied in the female body.
Do you think like when it comes to sex that, because I know, like people before that, like when they were with a certain partner, they would get way more yeast infections or way more UTIs. So our bodies just like more compatible with some people than others, or is it like two unhealthy microbiomes that are like being mixed?
Yeah, such a good question. Another thing that should be better studied, actually the role of partners and also partner treatment is something that we're really interested in. And a lot of our members come to us with questions, right? Because you can imagine how damaging that is to a relationship to feel like every time you want to be intimate with your partner, your life partner that you've chosen, like this feels like it's standing in the way. And that is so difficult and frustrating. We've actually been so heartened by so many men who've reached out to us being like, can you help me and my partner in some way here? We're struggling. But to answer your question more directly, there is research that shows that if a woman has bacterial vaginosis, which is it is the most common vaginal infection, that's kind of the broad strokes term that we use for any time there is a quote unquote overgrowth of bacteria in the vagina. So what I was mentioning about the good bacteria kind of losing out to the bad guys, we don't actually do a good job providing more specific diagnoses, which is one of my big frustrations. We kind of all call the whole thing bacterial vaginosis. But one of the most common microbes implicated in BV is a microbe called Gardnerella, which you might have heard because your doctors might have tested you for it, or you might have heard about it. And what they've shown is that if a woman has penetrative sex with her partner, she gets treated for bacterial vaginosis, but then they have sex again, he can actually reintroduce the Gardnerella back into her vaginal microbiome, and she'll end up recurring her infection of bacterial vaginosis. What hasn't been well studied is treating the male in the same way that male contraception hasn't been well studied. Neither has this. But that's something that we've had a lot of our members talk to us about, is actually going to get their partners treated as well is actually a really important part of getting better. So we know that there is a passing of microbiomes between people, but we haven't done a good job studying how to actually change that over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It makes me think of like how you're saying they've been studying stuff on males forever, and even the birth control thing. Like there was a trial for birth control for men, and it didn't come out because they experienced some mood disorders or some like feeling like moody. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like,
like weight gain and mood changes were really frustrating. So we're not going to move this trial forward. It was like, have you talked to any woman who's been on birth control?
Right. Exactly. And so it is really frustrating that you feel like, okay, if things like endometriosis, PCOS existed in men, there would be cures.
Completely.
And answers. And that's like the most frustrating thing is like, okay, like we've been dealing with this stuff forever, and yet there's, like you said, just the lack of research. But if men were dealing with this, they have no idea. They just don't know.
Completely. And I think, there's everything from, we have some friends who are working on making it possible for women to even advertise their products, right? When Evie was starting out, we weren't allowed to advertise anything because it was all getting flagged for the word vaginal or vagina. And it's like, meanwhile, you go on the New York City subway and there are erectile dysfunction ads in every direction that you look, right? And so I think that, the combination of the shame that women feel around the problems that we have, and then the lack of conversation that exists between each other, and then also as a society. I mean, we are definitely trying hard, in addition to furthering the research, helping women understand, doing kind of the data work. We're also doing a lot on the, what we call, demystification and destigmatization of vaginal health. We have a hilarious TikTok account, and it's been amazing to see how many women just want to laugh and talk about these things that we all kind of deal with, right? And I think there's just this huge shame and lack of conversation. And because we don't talk about it, women don't realize how prevalent it is. And it's just not being well studied, right? And we're trying to make a lot of noise about it because it is extremely common. So many women suffer from it. It affects our quality of life, our health outcomes, and we shouldn't be ashamed to say the word vagina out loud, right? It's a very critical part of our bodies that we've just been ignoring and not proactively taking care of. And that's something we are very much trying to change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's such a good point. I mean, from the time you're little, you're not really, at least like my generation growing up, I feel like people now are doing it a little bit differently, but like, it wasn't like, this is my vulva, this is my vagina, this, it's totally. Like, oh, that's my pee-pee or my, like whatever. I don't even know what I called it when I was little, but I definitely didn't call it a vagina. All right. So all of us have endless to-do lists, and we put fun and free time at the bottom of them, but you don't have to. With Best Fiends, you can take a little break whenever you want, give your brain a little challenge, do a puzzle, conquer some levels. And it doesn't have to be at the bottom of your list. It's just here and there. Right now, I am doing it at midnight, 3 a.m., during the day a little bit, it's nice, I'm with little kids all day, so to give my brain a little bit of a challenge. Mentally and physically I'm challenged all the time, but to give my brain some challenging time and to keep me awake while I'm nursing Tula in the middle of the night. I am always trying to conquer the side levels, but now I'm back on the regular path because I have to earn more in order to unlock my side levels. So I'm on 1738 level, and some of them are hard, y'all, but it is fun. You collect characters and get more keys that unlock points that help you and able to advance these characters. But I've been having a lot of fun with it now for a couple of years. So make sure that you check it out. You've earned your fun time. So go to the App Store or Google Play to download Best Fiends for free. Plus, you can earn even more with $5 worth of in-game rewards when you reach level 5. That's friends without the R, Best Fiends. I have like a little funny story. My sister, her son's 13 now, but I think when he was about 3, and she was having her second kid, somebody was talking to her and she's pregnant, and they're like, oh, is mommy going to have a baby? He's like, yeah. Is it going to come out of her belly? And he goes, it's going to come out of her vagina. And the lady was like, oh my gosh. And my sister's like, that's where it comes out of. So
exactly. Yeah. I think there's a lot we can do to better just educate ourselves, the other women and people with vaginas in our life, because it's amazing how much we deal with in kind of isolation and in shame. And I think like I said, 30% of people alone will have bacterial vaginosis this year, right? Like that is a lot of women, right? And I mean, to be honest, most people I talk to have never even heard of bacterial vaginosis, right? And 30% of women have it every year, right? It's just wild to me how little we talk about these things. Most people just think about yeast infections and UTIs because those are like the least stigmatized, but there's so many other infections that, in my opinion, are specifically stigmatized because their primary symptoms are odor. And no one wants to go around saying, my vagina smells like fish. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's a little bit more acceptable to say I have to pee a lot. Right. And so I think breaking down, the stigmas around these topics is so important. And it's been so cool to see that we've been able to create communities of tens of thousands of people who want to learn and laugh about their vaginal health.
Mm-hmm. Right. And like you said, it's so common. That's why I feel like for me, I'm like, yeah, I had a yeast infection in January. I know that doesn't make me dirty or gross or anything like that. Like it's something that happens, like if you ask any woman, everybody I know has either had a UTI, a yeast infection, or BV. Like totally. They're so common. And I also think with the BV, it's like, it sounds like it's a STD or something.
Yes. I was about to say so many people mistake it for an STD, and you can absolutely have bacterial vaginosis without having sex with anyone. You can get BV from having a period that lasts too long, right? Like there's so many things that can disrupt that balance of bacteria. And, we have so many women who come to us saying, my partner is accusing me of cheating and I think the lack of education and the shame around the topic means that there's a lot of misunderstandings as well about these conditions. And it's so important that we're able to talk about these things, understanding truly what they are and how they operate in our own body.
Yeah. I wish there was like how there's a sex ed course, that there was like just a course for people with female anatomy to like be able to learn and understand their bodies, because I'm 35 and I'm like learning so much that
totally.
I never knew growing up, and it's like, if I knew that, I don't know, just different things. Cause then we can also educate like other people. It's funny. Cause my husband grew up with mostly like girl cousins his age. He hung out with them. So like periods and things like that don't like ever weird him out. But there's been times where I'm like, what did I do? I don't remember what I did once. I don't know. Well, like, even like when I lost my mucus plug, I like showed him, I'm like, my mucus plug came out, look, and he's like, oh my gosh. And whenever he'll say like gross to something, I'm always like, it's not gross. It's my body and it's normal. And he doesn't mean it as in like, I'm gross. Like he's very loving and supportive and whatever. But like, you know, sometimes whatever, I'm like, oh my gosh, like when I had the yeast infection, I'm like, I have all this like discharge, whatever. I made him look at my vagina. I'm like, does it look because I'm pregnant. I'm like, does it look irritated down there? He's like, it is a little bit red. And I'm like, I think I need to tell my midwife, because I tried to like, you know, just tried to like eat really healthy and try to do things naturally for like a week or so, and it didn't really go away. So, but I'm like, this is like
hard,
what we go through, and it's not gross. It's not bad. You know, it's not like I'm, like I said, dirty or anything. This is just the normal things that women deal with.
And also, it's not, you know, you're not the only one. And I think, you know, I heard this hilarious quote. I forget who said it, but it was like, men are born, they lose their hair and they die. And meanwhile, women like are born, they get their periods, then they're trying to get pregnant, then they get pregnant, then you're postpartum, then you go through menopause, and our lives are just like constantly going like this. And yet, you know, the way in which we treat them from a medical perspective is almost the same, which is wild considering how much more change is happening. And that, to your point, we don't have strong education about our own bodies in these ways so that we can be prepared for when all of these changes happen.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And to just like be supported by a system who understands our bodies too.
Yeah. And I think, you know, it's no one's fault. I always say, like, it's not like doctors are malicious and like holding back information and trying to give you treatments that don't work, right? Of course, that's not the case. And, you know, it's frustrating that they don't have the tools, right? It's frustrating for them too, to not have a better solution other than just throwing antibiotics at something, even though they know it's going to come right back, right? And I think that's where our goal at Evie is to really provide the most comprehensive information, bring the best possible technologies to these problems so that we can have better options and better solutions. Because like I said, nobody wants it to be this way, not us, not our doctors. And it really is just going to require better research and better understanding so that us in the future and our future generations don't have to go through the same things we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. So like if somebody wants to find out more about their vaginal microbiome and they order your test, how does it work?
Yeah, great question. So the test is ordered directly by a consumer. So it's not something you have to go to your doctor for. And we're not here to, you know, give you a medical diagnosis and prescribe you with medication. We're here to help you better understand your own body and your relationship with your vaginal microbiome and your vaginal health, right? So what that means is you order the test. We ship it to you. You get a little like Q-tip swab that you take of your vagina. I always say it's easier than a tampon. We're all kind of familiar with the Q-tip swabs from our COVID tests over the past 2 years. This one doesn't have to, you know, swab your brain, which is nice. It's just a little 20-second swab of your vagina. You send it back to us. We do something called whole genome sequencing, where we're actually sequencing the whole genome of all bacteria and fungi that are present in your microbiome. And then we take that information, combine it with what you told us about your symptoms, the fact that you're pregnant, all of this other information, and are able to present back to you, here's everything that's happening in your vagina, right? So remember at the beginning, I was saying, you know, you have good microbes and disruptive microbes, like who's winning? Which ones are winning? Of the ones that might be pathogenic or disruptive, have they been associated with health outcomes that you might care about, right? Has research shown that a specific microbe is related to certain pregnancy outcomes or fertility outcomes? And that can then prompt a conversation with your doctor about how you can take a much more personalized and specific approach to handling that. So a lot of education around everything that we find, how it's related to your specific use case. And then really like, what can you do about it, right? So how do you actually have the right conversation with your doctor? How can you take proactive steps around your sex life or lifestyle changes that can actually improve your vaginal microbiome? For example, using condoms, or understanding how women having sex with women, why are they at higher risk for infection? Or people with a neovagina, how is that at higher risk for infections? What can you do about it? And really just educating people about their microbiome at that point in time, and then also over time. So one of the cool things that we've seen is that almost half of our members are taking the test every 3 months and starting to see for themselves, right? Like in your case, if you were feeling irritation, say you use the yogurt suppositories, the next question is like, did it work? Did anything happen? And people have never had access to that information before. And women are spending so much money on all of these products that, frankly, a lot of them are snake oil. And a lot of times women have been wondering, like, I feel like I have to keep doing this, but I don't actually know if it's helping me. And so one of the cool things is actually tracking over time. How is your diet change affecting your microbiome? How is your birth control affecting your microbiome? What does it look like when I have symptoms and when I don't have symptoms? Are these supplements I'm taking actually doing anything? And really giving people access to that feedback loop of how are the changes that I'm making actually impacting my vaginal health?
Mm-hmm. That's so cool. That is really cool. Yeah, because I was going to ask, like, I know that there's a lot of companies that like cater probiotics specifically for vaginal health. Like, is that actually working? Is that helping? How much of it actually reaches the area where it needs to? Or even like boric acid. It's like, oh, if you have a yeast infection, just use the boric acid and it's like safe and whatever. And it's like, okay, but is that like destroying good stuff too? Like, you don't know.
Totally. And no one knows. And that's what's so, it's so frustrating to me that we don't have access to information on our own bodies. And I think, there are definitely people out there who are telling us, we shouldn't be giving this information to women. We don't even have all the answers today. And I think our opinion is like, we don't have all the answers today, right? I've said to you more times than I can count, like the research isn't good enough there for me to answer that question. And I think our very strong hypothesis or kind of stance on the world is like, treat women like they're smart, right? Women are smart. Tell them what we know, tell them what we don't know, be very transparent about the state of the research. You'll see it throughout our product, but we rate every single recommendation and piece of education with how strong the research on that actually is. So for example, there's some preliminary research on the vaginal microbiome and PCOS. And so if you have PCOS and you have vaginal symptoms, that's something that we will surface to you. But we rate that with, this is very novel, right? And that's compared to something like how condoms can reduce the risk of vaginal infections, which is very well established, right? And so again, even though we don't have all the answers today, our very strong opinion is let's actually just be transparent about that. And then let's start to build the research so that we can get answers, right? I'm not going to sit here and wait and hope that someone decides to fund this research in the next 100 years. We as a community of women and people with vaginas can be the ones to actually build the research and answer our questions on our own bodies.
Right. I mean, and the only way to start that is with advocacy for your own health. And the more knowledge you have about your health, the more that you can advocate. So it's like, why would you not give this information? Because if this doctor has all these different women coming to him being like, listen, I know that I have this thing that's showing up in my vaginal microbiome. Is that affecting this? And they're like, oh, well, we don't know. We're going to force them to learn how to know.
Totally. And part of it is just saying over and over again, I want to know about my vaginal health. I care about this. This is important to me. It's frustrating me. It's affecting my relationship. I deserve to have this information. And I think that, while we have a lot of ambitions to change the clinical system, to have better diagnoses, to have better treatments, to do the research, I think the first thing that we care so much about is empowering the woman in the doctor's office, giving her the information that she needs to feel educated and empowered to advocate for the care that she wants on her own body. And by doing that, we will build the research to change the clinical system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have a question on, so you guys are giving this information out and then you're taking it to your provider and being like, listen, this thing's showing up and like the women are having good outcomes from their providers, like helping them with those problems. Cause I know for me, like I haven't had great gynecological, I can't say the word right now. Gynecological visits. Like anytime I've come with any problem, their answer has always been to put me on birth control. And, so I didn't know if I came with like a more specific thing, like this thing showing up, what can I do about it?
Yeah. Totally. I mean, and I'm not going to disagree with you. I think that's absolutely the case for a lot of women. And it's been actually really, frustrating and sad to hear from people who've said, I finally have answers on, the treatment that I'm being prescribed isn't working. Like I can show you in data that my vaginal microbiome isn't getting better. And, people who dismiss them, right? And say, it's in your head, you're totally fine. Don't worry about it. And that is something that we have to change. And I think that starts again, back to education, right? It's not only educating the women, but also educating the providers. And I think, like I said earlier, it's no one's fault, right? I mean, most of these microbes that I mentioned on this call, we only started to understand in the past 20 years, right? So we are just scratching the surface, and we are giving women the most up-to-date information that's changing on a potentially daily basis, right? And so of course, people who are practicing medicine 15 hours a day might not have that same high fidelity information. And so I think it's on us as women, it's on us as a company to make that information more widely accessible and to advocate for broader education on these topics, because we deserve better answers than it's in your head or it's going to be fine, when we finally have better technology to give us more information than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know anything about the vaginal strand things that would pop up. But it's interesting that, I mean, there is more stuff coming out than obviously, providers are learning more. You were saying before, when people get their results back, you kind of share like, oh, this strand is linked to, like, there's some research that it's linked with this thing, right? So like you kind of like, it's not just taking your results to a doctor, it's like giving us some education too. And then are there things that we could do ourselves without going to a provider? Or is like, how does that work, I guess?
Totally. Yeah. And something I should have mentioned is that, we stand on the shoulders of giants in that we have an incredible medical and scientific advisory board of not only some of the like preliminary researchers in the space, the people who discovered so many of these associations, the people who've been studying this for over 30 years, as well as some of the leading doctors who see, the most complex cases across the country, right? And essentially we've been working with them in order to make this much more personalized information and education accessible, understandable, useful to a doctor. And so that's been amazing because frankly, I think the best way to educate doctors is through other doctors, right? And making sure that they're advocating within their own circles about how important this information is. But to directly answer your question, we provide a bunch of different types of recommendations, right? Some about different ways to reduce disruptive microbes. Some might be, you have to talk to your doctor. This is truly, you're having these symptoms. We found these microbes. Warrants a conversation with a doctor, versus some other ones are just lifestyle changes or understanding how certain supplements have been shown or not shown to affect your vaginal health, or certain sex practices or birth control or vaginal estrogen, and really kind of tying together all the different pieces of your life and showing how they're related to your vaginal microbiome so that you can make more informed choices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's super interesting. I know, like, for me, I feel like my vagina is really sensitive. Like, if I ever use like any form of lube, like even if it's like oil-based, water-based, like all natural, anything, it messes with me. So it's like I could use coconut oil, but that's about it. But I've also heard
coconut oil degrades condoms, as you probably know.
Right. Yeah. I found that out from a guest that I had on who, I don't know if you've heard of her, Lisa Hendrickson Jack. She wrote a book called The Fifth Vital Sign, and she talks about how when you're taking into account your health as a female, you have to include your period health. So are you having PMS? What's your cervical mucus like? What's your cycle like? What are your PMS things? Those are telling you things about your health that are really important. Because like you said, the PMS, it's very common, but it's not normal. And a lot of people don't know that.
Completely. And I haven't met her, but I've heard great things about her and really agree with her entire perspective, which is, very similar to what I said at the beginning of like, there's so many metrics and, signals that our body is giving us that we are healthy or that we are sick that are different from the male body. Right. And right now we just don't leverage those, which is, in my opinion, why we're so bad at diagnosing and treating disease in women, because we assume that women are small men. And like, that's just not the case.
Mm-hmm. Right. I remember listening to her podcast too, and she had a guest on who was talking about the similar thing, just the diagnosis being different between women and men, and how a lot of times heart attacks in women go missed because the signs and symptoms are different.
Yeah, exactly.
That's crazy.
Exactly. Completely. The ways that we've been trained to look out for heart attacks are based on the way that heart attacks manifest in the male body. And so I think it's like 50% more likely to miss a heart attack in a female than a male.
Wow.
It's just a lot to be done.
Right. There's so much to be done. And it's like, you feel like sometimes that we're making big strides and then you feel like we're not.
Yeah. I mean, we are making big strides, right? I think it's crazy to realize that just in 1993, we were like, oh yeah, women don't have to be in research, right? So like, I mean, that wasn't that long ago. And we have made huge strides since then, but that doesn't mean that there's still not huge strides ahead of us.
Right, right. Yeah, absolutely. So when would you suggest that someone might take this test? Like, is there, like, just if you're experiencing symptoms or problems, or is it kind of like a good time, like if you're trying to have a baby and you just want to make sure you have really good vaginal microbiome going on, like when would you suggest people ordering Evie?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a few different use cases, right? I think there's, of course, if you're experiencing kind of recurrent symptoms and trying to understand what does my microbiome look like? Why am I having these symptoms? Of course, we'd love to provide some insight into at least what your vaginal microbiome looks like when you have symptoms and what it looks like when you don't have symptoms and start to highlight those differences. Like you mentioned, for people who are trying to get pregnant or who are pregnant, it's extremely helpful to see what the vaginal microbiome looks like so you can understand if you have those protective microbes, if you have disruptive ones, how you want to take care of that. But really, I mean, what I strongly believe is that vaginal health should be part of our preventative health, right? Like 84% of women who have vaginal dysbiosis, meaning that they don't have that protective immune layer of the healthy microbes, are completely asymptomatic, meaning they have no idea, right? But they are at risk of all of those same health outcomes. And I think we should absolutely be proactively and preventatively checking on our vaginal health, making adjustments to optimize it, because not only will that improve, you know, the symptoms, the physical, mental, emotional, relational parts of our lives, but then also it can help reduce the chances of all of these broader health outcomes that none of us want. So I think, you know, it's a lifelong journey. The other component is women in menopause, like I mentioned before, as estrogen levels go down. Often we also see a decline in those healthy microbes, and women are at risk again of UTIs, BV, vaginal discomfort, you name it. So I always say vaginal health is something that goes throughout your lifespan. It's not just a fertility or pregnancy question. It's really a health of the female body question.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. I mean, again, it just goes back to like, we kind of almost consider it like a separate piece. Like there's my body and then there's my vagina. Just like
it's illogical.
Right. I know. Yeah. That's so interesting. Well, I love what you guys are doing. Like I'm super into all of this stuff. And so I'm like, I don't know. It's just so interesting. Like for somebody who like me, I'm not sure exactly when the episode's going to come out, but we are recording while I'm still pregnant. So it might come out after I've had the baby. Like, are there things like, I feel like I'm at the point where it's like too late for me to change anything now. I'm like due in the next couple weeks and I've been having a lot of like pre-labor stuff. So like, would it be better for me to like just wait or, you know, like what, like somebody who's like listening to this and like, oh crap, I'm having a baby really soon. Is there time for me to like test and try to make changes, or should I just wait? Like, is having a baby going to be like a big disruption to my vagina and then like it has to reset? Like, I don't know how any of that works.
Totally. No, great questions. I mean, I always say whenever you take the test, it'll tell you whatever's happening at that point in your life, right? So if you're curious what your microbiome looks like before your baby goes through it, and like you want to know what you seeded your baby with, you could take the test now and, you know, you probably will find out after you have the baby, but it could be fun to know, like what did I seed him with? What was going on down there? And then after you give birth, it's definitely interesting to see how your vaginal microbiome shifts, right? Like I said, changes in hormones definitely affect the vaginal microbiome. There are a lot of women who during pregnancy, as estrogen levels are high, actually have a reduced rate of bacterial vaginosis, and they have an increased rate of yeast infections because estrogen promotes yeast and promotes lactobacilli, which fight off the BV microbes. But post-pregnancy, we see that as estrogen levels go down, women might have increased rates of bacterial vaginosis. So that's a time to just pay a little bit of attention to your vaginal health and make sure that you're supporting it along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so interesting. I feel like that's in alignment with what happened to me. I got BV for the first time ever, like after I had the baby, and I had no idea. And then being pregnant, I feel like I've struggled like with yeast infections a little bit here and there. And I'm like, come on, why? Like,
but at least, we're strong believers, and at least just knowing, like having the education and the information can help you say like, okay, this is normal. I know why this is happening. And I know kind of when it's going to go away, when I should take more action, instead of kind of living in anxiety or fear of what might happen because we don't have the information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So for people listening, where can they order the test from? And then where can they follow you on TikTok, Instagram, all of that?
Yeah, amazing. So the test is available at evvy.com. So it's EVVY.com. And then we have, in my opinion, an amazing TikTok and Instagram that are highly hilarious and informative. And on both Instagram and TikTok, we are at EVVyBio.
Okay, awesome. And I'll include all of that in the show notes for people listening, so it's easy for you to find. I just want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast, for answering my questions. I feel like I could just pick your brain for a long time about like a lot of different things on this topic. But like you said, I mean, there's so much research that still needs to be done. And I mean, I feel like we could have gone in like so many different directions of this is linked to that and this is linked to this. And, like there's so much information to unpack in the vaginal health. So if you're listening, you can get a test and test your own vaginal health and then like explore what's coming up in there for you. Which I'm going to definitely do because I'm like into that stuff. Like I said, we got
to get you a test before you give birth. So we're on it.
We'll see.
But thank you so much for having me. And thank you for creating a platform where women can talk about things that are going on in their bodies, because this is half the battle. So we are very grateful for you and everything you're doing.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. I seriously need to order one of these tests. I interviewed her I think a few days before I had the baby, or like the week before. So I knew I probably wasn't going to get everything back in time. But now that things are settling down there, I really want to do this test because I am more prone to yeast infections. And since I've been following their Instagram account and reading about it more, like there's so much more to it. If you're somebody who gets any of these things, you should get one of these tests and see what's going on down there, because there's also, you can work with people to try to balance things. Like our body's meant to live in harmony, and sometimes we need more information, education, and then some help. So I used to not be prone to yeast infections. I think since having Jovi, I've had a few, and that's kind of new for me. So, but I definitely want to check out their tests because you guys know I'm super into this stuff, and I would like to have really great vaginal health. So I'm working on my gut microbiome. Why not work on my vaginal microbiome? So make sure that you check them out. I'll tag everything in the show notes, and we will see you next week. Love you guys. Bye.
If you want to be the most interesting person at the cocktail party, well, hop on over and listen to the Brain Candy podcast.
Our award-winning content will have you laughing while you're learning.
We read all the best articles, books, and studies, and keep up with new TV shows, documentaries, and pop culture. And then we cram it all into 2 shows a week.
Conspiracy theories, cannibal rabbits, unsolved mysteries, the history of the Walkman. There's something for everyone.
The Brain Candy podcast. Find our link in the show notes.
Or simply search for the Brain Candy podcast on your podcast app.